There is Ohio State football practice on Monday. It's the middle of the week. That's the perfect time for some spring camp stonks on the podcast daily. That's Bill Landis and Jeremy Birmingham. I am Austin Ward. It is that time again for the game where there are no rules and no consequences and no actual financial value. But we are going to start projecting what these 15 practices could look like and who we've got our eyes on for some big spring camps. Bill, where should we begin?
You don't want to start with me because I'm going to start on the offensive line. No, I won't start on the offensive line. Can we start at receiver? Can we start with Mylan Graham? And
come on, you're supposed to leave that for me.
We're supposed to be hiding him this spring.
Yeah, that seems like the plan. He is probably like exactly the type of guy that is driving teams not wanting to have spring games televised anymore because he has. He's a 5-star prospect. People know who he is, but he didn't do a whole lot as a freshman and didn't get to Ohio State until June, right? He wasn't in spring last year. So I'm just like super excited to see kind of what that all looks like. But I don't know that the roster is necessarily like ripe with a bunch of guys who could like surprise and push their way to really important roles on this team. There are some. There's a ton of roster turnover, so there's maybe more than usual, but it's not like there's 50 of those guys on the roster. But Mylan Graham is definitely one of them in my mind. So I don't know how we're supposed to value this, like guys who we think are going to break out in the spring or guys we're just interested in. I would put him in both categories because that the camp where he got offered, which I guess was like ages ago at this point, he just like really caught your attention and kind of turned your heads and clearly caught Brian Hartline's attention. And he just seems so like technically proficient for a guy who's very early on still in his receiver development. So there's a real opportunity there for that to be a pretty like loud, I think, breakout for him this spring. Who knows how much of him we might see, but I think we'll be talking about him a whole lot.
Feels like he might, need and get more reps over these 15 practices than Jeremiah Smith or Carnell Tate, or even to maybe some extent Brandon Ennis. Like you still have to go through practices. And I'm not saying that they're going to put the top 3 guys in bubble wrap and not let Julian Sayin and Lincoln Keenholz and Tavian St. Clair throw to them, because you're going to have to do some work. You still want to develop and you still want to, get some football under their belt to prepare for the season. But like, you certainly don't need number 4 to go full contact. And if you have some of those practices, then Mylan Graham, I think, would be the beneficiary of that. So like, if there's scrimmages that we get to watch, I think that's a very smart stock, Bill, because I think his is going to be soaring by the time we get to the middle of April.
Yes. Good one for me.
Good start, Billiam. Okay, so we got to talk to Matt Patricia last week, right? And he said the names that you think he's going to say, right? Oh, it's hard not to look for Caleb Downs as soon as you walk in the building. Sonny Styles looks like and he mentioned Arvell Reese, and that was the 3rd guy he mentioned. And to me, like, that's pretty telling. Maybe, and even on Monday when we were at Roosters, Bob Carpenter was running down the linebackers and he forgot to mention Arvell Reese. And it's like, how do you not mention that guy? He's going to be a starter. And I don't know if it's because Arvell is kind of quiet. Arvell didn't play, he played a lot last year, but he wasn't a starter. If there's all this conversation about CJ Hicks and the move to defensive end, or all the hype around Riley Pettijohn and TJ Alford, but like, Arvell Reese is a monster, and he is going to be a problem for defenses or offenses around the country. And I'm excited, maybe most of all, to see what Matt Patricia does with him, because he specifically mentioned how with New England, they used to just love having big linebackers who could run, who could do a lot of things. And Arvell Reese is a monster, like the good kind, not the kind that sleeps under your bed and terrifies you, but the kind that like you look at across the offensive line and then terrifies you. Like, Arvell was probably like, is there anybody on the roster who was more of a revelation last year than Arvell Reese, as far as a guy that, like, we knew Cody Simon was going to start and he was obviously better than anybody anticipated, but was there anybody else on the roster who last year was a complete afterthought in the spring that ended up playing as a role the way that Arvell Reese did?
I don't think so. Played like 300 some snaps. Yeah.
Over the duration of the year, probably not. You could lump in someone like Carson Hinsman with the way that they were, shoved to the side throughout spring and in the summer, and
But he was a
even when there's
previous starter.
I know. I'm trying to think of other people in the conversation just for the sake of argument, because I think you're right. I don't there's gotta be somebody else that's close, but maybe there's not.
I don't. Yeah, I mean, I've been trying to think about it. Like Bennett Christian played a big role, but he didn't have. He wasn't like a guy that, if he wasn't out there, you noticed a difference. When Arvell wasn't on the field, you noticed a difference for Ohio State. And I'm just. I mean, it's March 12th. It's time for bold predictions for the season. Uh,
What?
like this past year when Sonny Styles was a Butkus finalist and Cody Simon wasn't. Next year, Arvell Reese is going to be a finalist and Sonny Styles won't be.
There was that is bold. It felt like there was some of that Matt Patricia conversation and James Laurinaitis as well. That's like, well, Arvell can do everything. So maybe the fact that he and Sonny could have both like shown the athleticism to play multiple positions unlocks another level of flexibility and multiplicity for this defense. That seems like a pretty scary thought too.
Yeah, I don't. I'm Matt Patricia, like his eyes were as wide as a person's eyes could be. I think when he was talking about Sonny and Arvell and like the versatility and what all he could do, I think he's going to have like a pretty hard time this spring limiting himself on the ideas that he tries to come up with for the defense. I guess this is the time of the year that you do it, and then you start paring it down in the summer. But I don't know how often we're going to be out there, but I'm almost on alert for like every time we're out there, the defense doing something crazy because I think Matt Patricia just like might be mad scientisting this thing
Sciencing.
throughout the spring as he figures out like what all he can and can't do with this group. And I think it starts with guys like Arvell.
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
take
we
it to the next step if I can. Like it's the entire linebacker room. If you think about line up James Laurinaitis' linebackers and compare them side by side to what Ohio State's linebackers looked like 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and oh boy, it's different. Like, and then you add in Riley Pettijohn. Did you guys see Riley Pettijohn in the hallway the other day when we were like waiting for the Ryan Day press conference to
I
start? And you're
thought that was the hallway.
right, and, like, you're like, "Man, that is a not a normal looking freshman linebacker." So, that entire room, like, stock is way, way up, and which is not a surprise because we expected James Laurinaitis to be really good at this, but he has changed the profile athletically of that group very quickly.
Did you think it would happen that fast?
No, um, because
I did.
this good one, Bill. You're 2 for 2 today. I think that again, there's an expectation, and I think maybe James Laurinaitis is helped by the success Brian Hartline's had because we knew James, personality wise, would go in and really win in living rooms because he's an incredibly personable human being to talk to, and obviously exceptionally intelligent, and the passion he has for Ohio State shines through. But I think the success that Brian Hartline has had as a developer and being able to point to his experience at Ohio State in the NFL, like I think that probably bridged the gap a little bit for Laurinaitis, as opposed to coming out and saying, "Hey, I got to put in a couple years to show you guys how this can work." But then it paid. I mean, even the jump between the 23 linebackers and the 24 linebackers, as far as their productivity and the way that they looked when Laurinaitis was the full-time linebackers coach, was enough, I think, to really open the eyes of people, like Riley Pettijohn, who was the number one linebacker in the country.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I think there's a lot of optimism about what that linebacker group is gonna look like, and feels like a lot more uncertainty about what the safety it's no longer a safety-driven defense, I don't think. That was trademarked
It has to be.
by Jim Knowles. I don't know. I think that's what
Matt
Penn State
Guerrero is
probably has
Jim
now.
Knowles.
Um,
Yeah.
that sounds like a different conversation, but there is, like you do start with from this place where you have Caleb Downs. Like, that position group is gonna be pretty good to elite, regardless of who lines up next to him. But I think there is a fascinating opportunity and a lot of intrigue about what that looks like next to him, not just with Lathan Ransom gone, but also Jordan Hancock. And Berm, were you surprised about the amount of Malik Hartford name dropping that we'd heard in the last couple of weeks?
I guess what I'm surprised is that we have overlooked him,
Yeah.
not necessarily. I don't. I think oftentimes in recruiting and the way that roster building happens, we think about the seniors and the guys that are playing and starting and the freshmen, and we don't generally think about the guys that are waiting their turn who are in their second year. And I think that's probably unfair to kids who have been in the program. Malik Hartford, who was he 2 years ago, not last spring, but the one before it, he was the one everyone was talking about and rizzing up. I wanted to drop a rizzing.
That's not how that word. That's not the way
It's
that
not
word's used. No.
skibbity. Um, but I think that we have it's probably our fault, like that he's not being talked about as much as he should be. Not necessarily a surprise that the coaches are talking about him because if you look at the roster, like you have Caleb Downs and then you have Malik Hartford, like as far as experience goes. Although I
Mhm.
guess the Keenan Joseph, Keenan, say
Nelson.
another thing.
Nelson.
Keenan Nelson from St. Joseph is still there, and we don't talk about him either, I guess. But
Yeah, well, I think that's why I wanted to bring up Malik Hartford. It wasn't even just when he arrived. I mean, he had one of the better training camps 2 years ago, and he, like, s got a chance to start early on as a true freshman. It's, like, almost out of nowhere, and I don't think that potential and that athleticism and that ability has suddenly vanished. He had to work through some injuries, and then there was a different depth situation when you had Caleb Downs and Lathan Ransom out there a year ago. So I guess that's my way of saying I think that there could be something brewing right there that, it's he hit a little bit of a dip, I think physically more than anything else. And now once you get through the other side of that, it could be pretty awesome to watch come back out on the other side. Or at least that's my expectation because that's why I'm buying stock in Malik Hartford heading into spring.
I think it's good. He was done no favors his freshman year. Like
Yeah.
they let him start against Youngstown State and they pulled him out of the game after 11 snaps. Like just let him play through some stuff. It's Youngstown State. But that created, I think, a bit of maybe not a narrative, but at least a point of view on Malik Hartford. And then they put him in the Michigan game when in a role that he had not played all year in the most important
one
game of the
play.
season. And it's like, of course they threw the ball his way. And then he was just a guy stuck behind two very good safeties last year. So I still think he's got a ton of talent. He and Jalen McClain both do. I think it's going to be a really fun competition. I would imagine both will have opportunities to play this fall, no matter how that shakes out. But um, it's hard not to like a guy who plays with the physicality that Malik Hartford plays with. And I think if we get some opportunity to see that on display this spring, we'll be talking about it quite a bit. I think us and the coaching staff.
Well, if
Yeah.
you're looking for a like for like comparison to Lathan Ransom, there's nobody on the roster who's more
Mhm.
appropriate for that conversation than Malik Hartford is. As Bill said, the physicality. The dude is like nasty when it comes to coming downhill and hitting people, almost to the point to his detriment as a
That's
freshman, because I think he did himself no favors by regularly knocking himself out. So I think that if you're looking for someone to surprise you and take a leap this spring, it's probably only Carver.
it is it's a skill, right? To learn how to play with that kind of physicality. Like
Well, it took Latham 5 years to do it.
I know, but also like Travion Henderson had to learn how to do it because these
Mhm.
guys play with such abandon and they have such an impressive skill set that they can hurt themselves as much as others. I think Arvell Reese has had to work through some of that too. These high end guys, when you have that amount of off the charts, athleticism, you can be a danger to yourself as well. So that's maturing as well in the game. And I think maybe Malik Hartford is at that point. We'll find out. Now I bet Bill is, after taking my Mylan Graham pick, is now going to take an offensive lineman.
I am, but I might take a different one than maybe people are expecting, and I'm just being a little bit prisoner of the moment. But I'll buy some Tegra Shabola stock. I think going in the spring. I, you know, I'm glad he's a guard. Like I've long thought that's where he belongs. I know that his first season starting there like wasn't always great, and there's some injury stuff that goes into that, but like the physical profile and the traits remain, I think, pretty high level. And then he tweeted that video of himself just going through some workouts the other day, and I was like, yeah, that's that's what it's supposed to look like. So I think he's important, as we've discussed previously, because of the numbers being what they are at tackle. But I don't know what his pitch count will be, if he'll be on one as a returning starter this spring. I would bet not, because he's still fairly inexperienced and has some developing to do. And there's a new offensive line coach. So Tyler Bowen might want to put those guys through the paces a little more, just to kind of get a better feel for what he has there. But I just think there's still like a lot of like meat left on that bone for Tegra in terms of development. And now that he's got a year of starting underneath him, I could see him taking a fairly large step this spring. And maybe that stock is a little lower now than um, you'd like it to be because of how last year went, but I am envisioning it going up rather dramatically this year. Whether that's the competition with all the other guys on the interior, maybe bringing that out of him a little more, or just the natural development that can come after you get that 1 year of experience, combined with just like his physical abilities. That I do think, if you look across the offensive line, maybe he's on the higher end. I think of just sort of like most physically gifted when you talk about size and agility. So um, I think this is a big spring for him, but I think there's a big fall ahead from him too. So I'll try to get in on that early.
If the light has been turned on, right? The question is, can it stay
Mhm.
on?
Yeah.
Because I think we saw him in the playoff play his best football in the biggest moments. And I think maybe to your point, Bill, that might be a byproduct of Austin Sarabald and Luke Montgomery emerging and playing so well that if he didn't emerge and didn't step up, that opportunity to keep playing may not have been there or presented itself. And that
Right.
was with Austin Sarabald being dinged up. So I look
And with
forward.
Tegra being banged up.
Yeah, I think that this spring, like that three-man competition for those two spots is just going to be one of the funnest things to watch all spring. Because I think you're going to see the best out of all of them. I don't think it's a situation. I think like all three guys are ascending at the right moment, and I think that's fascinating.
Yeah.
So
I agree.
your stock projection is all the interior guys?
I think it has to be. I mean, it's a really good group of interior linemen, and the thing is with Austin and Luke, like I think that they can bring out of Tegra the one thing he needs, which is like attitude, and those two are so nasty. And I think that's the one thing that Tegra really needs to like get to. And I think seeing that in Luke and Austin will make it easier for Tegra to let that side of him go. And I think that's a positive for all of them.
All right. Well, who else you watching, Berm?
Uh, I'm trying not to be, as to use the term Bill just used, a prisoner of the moment about things, but the way that Carlos Lachlan talks about Bo Jackson is is different than I would have anticipated based on the way that Bo's high school career and recruitment went. Like he was obviously a top 10 running back and has a lot of the physical skills, but he was not someone that was consistently on the field in high school. And I think that when he committed, it was kind of like, yeah, well, maybe we'd rather have Marquise Davis, the kid who from Cleveland who ended up signing with Missouri. A lot of people, even throughout the recruitment, like, well, maybe is he even the right one? Is he better than Turbo Rogers? Is he better than Isaiah West? And maybe it's just because he's going to be RB3 in spring no matter what. And I think that he's going to get a lot of reps and a lot of opportunities to prove himself. I'm finding myself trying not to get on the Bo Jackson hype train, but at the same time, I think we need to be prepared because the running back is the one position that is the easiest for a freshman to come in and make an impact. I'm not wanting to project that he's going to be like the starter or lead the team in rushing or anything like that, but he's going to make himself a guy that actually has to be on the field, I think, which is not something I would have anticipated on signing day in December. But the way that Carlos Locken talks about him does not seem like lip service, especially from a guy that does not give lip service.
Were
You
you
said this.
anticipating Bo having a full spring?
Yes, but I also was anticipating Isaiah West to have a full spring, and so I thought those two would have to split those final or those extra reps. And so since Isaiah West is not going to be fully cleared till the end of summer, I think that changes things considerably for Jackson.
You said this was a bold prediction show for the whole season. You don't want
It
to do
might
it now?
be. We can just do one at a time.
Just pick them to win the Doak Walker, man. Do it.
We can plop one in there. Lamar Bo Jackson might be good at football.
Oh,
So
you sure about that?
yeah, if he is what Carlos Lockwood is insisting he is, or not insisting, or maybe not even warning people about, but just like he's dropping those hints, like pay attention now because this guy might have it. And so I'm extremely interested to see how he handles getting hit by Ohio State level defensive players because that is the one area where like he might regress to the mean of what we expect from a freshman. But the hype is getting there.
Think so. The other part of this conversation that I started at safety is like, how exactly would you fill the void? I think Jordan Hancock might be the single most difficult player on this roster to replace, which sounds hyperbolic or a prisoner of the moment because Ohio State also is going to have a new starting quarterback. But like, I wonder what ideas they'll kick around, and if Devin Sanchez could be part of that immediately. If one of the returning guys, I this idea of like Davis Igbinosun playing in there as like a evolutionary version of Sean Wade intrigues me. I don't know if there's any possibility of that actually happening. I'd love to see it. I don't know if it would cost him money in the long run, if it would make him money in the long run, if he wants to play inside, if he wants to, move, stay outside where he's been throughout his career. I don't know. But we've seen Jermaine Matthews play some in that slot as well. And I think any of those guys would have the ability to do so. And I don't know if Matt Patricia, Matt Guerreri, Tim Walton have a 100% definitive. And by the way, Lorenzo Styles has played there too, and he's back. So you have, I think, at least 4 people who could do it. Do they all want to? Does Ohio State want all of them to? I really don't know the answer. And I don't know that they have to have one going into Monday and the first day of practice. But eventually you're going to have a solution because, as the last few years have proven, that position is critical in this day and age in college football. And Matt Patricia has also talked about that and the role that played throughout his tenure in New England. So I know that it's not going to be overlooked by any stretch of the imagination. And I just don't, I do say this a lot in going into a spring or training camp. I don't know what's going to happen, but I
Mhm.
think that's why it's the thing that has me most intrigued. And that's not a stock, I guess, other than
I
I
was
think
gonna ask who's the
I,
individual there that's got your
I
attention?
would, if I could like speak it into existence, I want to see Davison Igbinosun play there because I think
Mhm.
that might also solve a different problem, which is the spate of penalties that occur every single time that he is playing on the perimeter. And I know that you live with it. You take the good with the bad. The highs are there. Um, and he's playing at a level that would definitely get him drafted in the early rounds as an NFL caliber cornerback. But boy, with that size, with his physicality, his willingness to come play against the run and to cover, that would be like a hypothetical stock that I would want to buy.
Walton was asked about that. I think Doug actually asked him if there was any inclination to move Igbenogson inside, and didn't seem like he was into that idea. But I also asked him, like, is Davison just wearing oven mitts all spring? Like, is he allowed to use his hands for anything? Tim Walton seemed pretty insistent that he was gonna like that being less handsy was gonna be a focus all spring for him.
I
So
hope so.
I think it's gonna be interesting to see how they use him because as you mentioned, like the length there on the inside, we've seen the way that that position for Ohio State gets elevated by having those longer guys inside. And not,
Mhm.
going back to Sean Wade and then Jordan Hancock and then the difference, and it's not a knock on Lorenzo Styles or anybody else that goes in there, but when someone else has been moved to the inside, it doesn't look the same. Um, Bill, do officials let the inside cornerback slash the slot safety get away with more contact? Because I think they probably do when you're dealing against tight ends and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, you're also just kind of around like a larger mass of bodies and less
I
on an
can't be
island
seen.
to be noticed. But it does feel like all the penalties that have been called on Davison have been like back shoulder sideline fade kind of ball. So why don't just don't put him in that position and maybe that would solve a lot of the issues there. I don't know.
Who do
But he
you like
also,
in the slot, Bill?
Um, yeah, Davison is the one that interests me the most, I think. And then I guess I would go to Jermaine Matthews after that, just because we've seen him do it a little bit. Um, and I suppose from like a physical profile standpoint, Aaron Scott's pretty interesting too in that position.
Yeah, I mean, the
I don't know
thing is
about does he have the physicality though? I don't know. You maybe probably know better than I do.
I don't know that he does yet. I think that Jermaine like is the one for me that like is ooh boy that's exciting because he's
Mhm.
so aggressive and so willing to bring the lumber, and that opens up the door for a competition between Aaron Scott and Devin Sanchez on the outside where I think you get the best out of those guys, and I think Jermaine is so good that he is probably as good inside as he is outside, and I don't know that that can be said for the other. Like I think he's the one guy that has the skill set and the physicality that translates where you're not taking him away from something he does great and giving him something that he could do okay at. I think he could be great at other ones. But like he's definitely the guy for me that I'm like, ooh, I'd like to see that. No one
yeah,
asked me that.
I mean, the point is there are good options, but what does it look like? I don't know. We're gonna have to wait and
Well,
find out.
we can't just dismiss Lorenzo Styles. Like he
No, no,
was
no,
the
no,
guy
no.
that played there a lot. And now he played most of the time when he was in dime. And I don't know how much dime stuff you're gonna see from Ohio State. We haven't really gone through the schedule and see how many teams are going to throw all over the yard. But I do think that Lorenzo is like going to be one of the returning leaders of this defense, and I think it'd be folly to ignore him. But physically, like he doesn't look like those guys.
Yeah, well, we're going to see what they all look like starting on Monday morning back in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. It is almost here, folks. No more reviews, previews, projections. We'll actually have some practice to talk about, and we definitely will every day on the podcast daily. Thanks for joining us for this Wednesday edition, though, a little pre-spring stock watch with Bill Landis and Jeremy Birmingham. I am Austin Ward. Thanks again for joining us. We'll talk to you later.